The meeting to order for Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency at 1:33 for September 10th, 2020. And I just like, before we do the roll call, I'd like to go over some meeting procedures. We need to maintain clear communications, participate verbally, not through gestures. I can't see any of you, so I wouldn't know that anyway. But to all participating today, be aware that your surroundings will be visible unless you set up a virtual background. So make every effort to limit distractions and turn off or mute other devices. And please mute when not speaking during the meeting, but do not put your meeting device on hold. As chair, I will call on each director by name for questions, comments on each item, and that will rotate throughout the meeting. In addition, all directors have the opportunity to speak further on an item in no certain order, but please state your name for the record before beginning. Public comment will occur on each item following the director's discussion. Each public speaker is asked to state their name for the record and affiliation if representing an entity. And directors, when making and seconding a motion, state your name for the record. And then for voting, all action items requiring a vote will be conducted by roll call. So those are the meeting procedures. And we will begin now with the roll call. Ms. Duquette.
Thank you. Chair Brown.
Here.
Director Crane. I believe you're muted, Director Crane.
Present.
Thank you. Director White.
Here.
Director Robinson.
Virtually here.
Director Brown.
Here.
Director Matt. All right. Back to the chair.
All righty. So next we have approval of the minutes. And I do have some corrections, so I'll just start that off. On page 2, third paragraph, third line, we need to strike a D. It'd be updated, it should be update. And then on page 3, at the very end of the meeting, it says absent Director Brown. We need to insert Brandy. So anyone else for corrections? Hearing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
This is Alfred White. I'll move to approve the minutes as corrected.
All righty, thank you. Do we have
Director Robinson, and I second.
Thank you, sir. Sarah, roll call vote, please.
Chair Brown.
Yes.
Director Crane.
Aye.
Director White.
Yes.
Director Robinson.
Yes.
Director Brown.
I abstain.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item 4, staff updates. Ms. Duquette.
Just, I have a couple things to go over today. We have a new AmeriCorps fellow that joined our team on September 1st. His name is Andrew Bake, and he was in yesterday's TAC meeting. He's in a mandatory orientation meeting right now, but he's going to hop on at the end of the meeting to introduce himself. So he's a recent graduate of Santa Clara University, and we're excited to have him on our team, and he'll be here for a year working with us to help us complete this GSP. So he'll be on later, and hopefully maybe during director's report, he can introduce himself. The next item is, after the agenda was published, we received a request from CSLI for a letter to support their grant for a groundwater coordinator for the Ukiah Valley Basin. Essentially part of the item was posted online as well as an email sent out with that updated information. And the request is really for their coordinator would support local watershed activities like developing groundwater recharge projects, well and stream flow monitoring, stream restoration, water conservation projects for farmers, coordination with private landowners. They've been a really great partner with us with finding places to put monitoring equipment in and getting data. And so I'm bringing this up during staff updates to get direction from the board to move forward with writing a support letter. And I believe Laura Marcus is also on the line to answer any questions.
Okay, and for the record, CLSI is the California Land Stewardship Institute. And Ms. Marcus, do you have something to say about the letter and the support that you're requesting?
Well, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for considering this. We do think that having, if we get this grant, that having this coordinator would be a benefit to the process of implementing groundwater recharge and different kinds of improvement projects. It's a pretty competitive grant. They're only giving out like 8 of them in the state. So we don't know whether that will, will be successful or not, but we would greatly appreciate a support letter from your organization. We've gotten quite a few. We have about 30 now, including a lot from the agricultural communities, city of Ukiah, county supervisors, the flood control district, quite a few. And then I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Directors, questions?
I had one just to familiarize myself whether or not this is the same organization. Sorry, Brandy Brown, tribal chair, tribal seat. Is this the same organization that put forth a grazing application grant to the NCRP? Just trying to.
Yes, okay. We did. It was grazing for fire control.
Cattle, right?
Well, we weren't specifying. It could be cattle, goats, or sheep, but any of them. Yeah, we think that grazing could be a benefit to reducing fuels.
I just wanted to make sure I was knowing which agency this was, because I think a couple of other people use the California Conservancy. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Director Brown. Anyone else? Hearing none. Sarah, do we need a vote on this, or can we just do it by consensus?
Consensus.
I would like for it to be a vote,
We can do a vote.
just for the record.
So we need a motion?
The director, right, I'll make a motion. Did I not?
I have a motion from, I think Director Robinson might have been making a motion as well, but he was on mute.
How about I second Al's motion?
Yeah, and my motion was about to be that we send a support letter from the GSA to this grant request from CLSI.
Director Robinson would like to second that motion and congratulate Sarah on her lip reading.
And I'm assuming within the motion, it would be signed by the chair.
Correct.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Sarah, please conduct the roll call.
Chair Brown,
Yes?
Director Crane,
Aye.
Director White,
Yes.
Director Robinson,
Aye.
Director Brown,
That would be a strong no from the tribal seat.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Any other updates?
And the last one is now that we have the Proposition 68 grant, which started to kick in, we got the award back in March. The grant agreement was signed and we're starting to use the funding as of July. Actually, I can technically as of May. We're moving forward with our community outreach. Originally, these were going to be community outreach meetings in person, but due to COVID and the likelihood that we're going to be dealing with this for quite a while, we decided to move into that virtual strategy. So we'd like to do our first of 4 community meetings at the end of this month, kind of an introduction to the GSP process, and then we'll be doing them throughout the GSP creation period. But we wanted to talk with you guys. We think it would be really great to have as many of the TAC members and the directors participate or jump on the virtual webinar that we'll be doing. And so we'd like to do it at the end of the month. So I wanted to just see if there's any preferences for our board members. I'm thinking either September 28th, 29th, or 30th. So I just wanted to see if there was any preferences from the board members on what dates might work for you to join us. And of course, once we have the flyer ready, we'll send it out to all of you guys to share with your respective organizations and groups. And hopefully we can get a pretty good turnout for our virtual webinar.
So one question I have, I don't have my calendar sitting in front of me. Can we just email you?
Yeah, I can send out an email. We could do, and then just reply back to me and with your date preferences, and we'll try to do an accommodation. But like I said, I think it'd be great if we had some of our board members join. And then you also get an email from us probably in like a week or so with a flyer for the event and some information so you guys can publicize it.
Great. Vice Chair Crane, do you have any questions or comments?
No.
Director White?
None, thank you.
Director Brown?
No, thank you.
Director Robinson?
Aye.
Okay, then
Well, I think I got.
I believe then, Ms. Duquette, you'll be sending out the email fairly soon.
Yes, and that's all we have for agenda item 4 today.
Okay. So moving on to item number 5, public comments on items not on the agenda. The board will not enter into a detailed discussion or take any action on any items presented during public comments. Such items may only be referred to staff for administrative action or scheduled on an upcoming agenda for discussion. Persons wishing to speak on specific agenda items should do so at the time specified for those items. The presiding chair will limit public comments to 3 minutes. So anyone, public comment? Do you see anyone raising their hand?
No.
Okay. Then we'll move forward on item number 6, and these are our action items. And do we have, who's going to be doing the presentation? This will be on 6A, discussion and possible action regarding updates to the monitoring network.
Okay, I think.
Mendocino County. So there's a presentation in the packet. Also, a revised edited version was posted online and emailed to you. The main presenters will be Larry Walker and Associates, and we'll go ahead and share the screen so you can see the presentation. And we broke the agenda items 6A through 6D are all included in this large presentation. So we'll be going through the agenda items.
Okay, and I noticed on the PowerPoint that in the presentation, we do break in between, and I think that would be good for the presenters. so that we can receive public comment under each of the items, as well as questions or statements from the directors. So please go forward and state your name for the record, please.
Okay, this is Laura Foglia with Larry Walker Associates, and we will take turn in the presentation. I think it's between me and my colleague Amir Mani, and he will introduce himself in a little while. And so that we will try to keep you all awake in this Zoom environment. Sorry that the presentation is a little it was changed a little bit, mostly after some comments that we got yesterday at the TAC meeting. So that's why we revised it a little bit. I think what we want to give you today is an introduction or a summary of all what we have done in the past 3 months when we were not really, we didn't really meet, and we didn't meet with the TAC or the board, but we met and we discussed with a lot of the stakeholders and a lot of you guys separately for different reasons. And the first thing we want to give you an update is the work that we are doing for the monitoring network, and some update on instrumentation that we are carrying on, and new stream gauge that we are working with the CLSI actually to install. And I really want to point out that the monitoring network is a key component of this plan. So we need to pay particular attention. I think at the next board meeting, we will have a more in-depth discussion about the monitoring network, but the monitoring network is critical because it's basically the tool that the GSA will have for the next 20 years to demonstrate sustainability. So we will have to be very careful on what gets included in this monitoring network, and we need to have something that really can help the GSA with the goal of demonstrating that everything is going fine. So it sounds like easy, but it's a very important piece of information. And I think with this, Amir, I'll pass it to you so you can give an update on the monitoring.
Thank you, Laura. This is Amir Mani from Larry Walker Associates, and hello, everybody. So as Laura mentioned, during the past couple of months, we followed up on some of the things that we started before COVID-19 hit. I just want to go through a very quick background since it's been a long time since we started this, and then go through the update. So most of the things that we've been doing in the past month go into the framework of these that we call transacts. If you remember, like about a year ago, we started a discussion on this, and we submitted a grant application for technical support services that I'm going to call TSS from now. And that got approved, but it had a lot of things followed up by that till we actually can call DWR to drill wells for us. So our idea was to use the stream gauges that are available in the groundwater basin and use the existing monitoring wells around those stream gauges, or drill new wells if we need to, and form these lines across the Russian River or some of the tributaries. So we can monitor the groundwater elevation in those wells continuously, and we have the stream gauge that is monitoring the flow in the river continuously. And then by coordinating these measurements, we could get a good understanding of the surface water and groundwater interaction around the stream network in the basin or in the watershed. So a summary of the updates. So we started this. We went mostly after the DWR wells that we want to drill. We had a lot of Sarah had a lot of discussions about getting the agreements from different entities that have the public lands. But in the past couple of months, we tried to actually go after the existing wells that we want to instrument to get them in, since we knew that the DWR wells might take a while for them to drill. So the first one that we started was the Saturn Transit, like it's around the wastewater treatment plant. And we already instrumented one well from the wastewater treatment plant, and we talked to several well owners, and we have practically 3 lined up from the private lands that we want to instrument. So basically, we divided the basin into 3 zones. One is in the northern part, that is Redwood Valley. One is in the central part, right between the Lake Mendocino and city of Ukiah. And one is right next to the wastewater treatment plant. So these are the 3 parts that we have as for the transects. And what we actually started with is the southern one next to the wastewater treatment plant, because we have a lot of monitoring wells that are already incorporated in the CASGEM program for the county. So from those in the southern transect, we have 6 existing monitoring wells that we prefer to instrument. We have 1 instrumented at the treatment plant. We have 2 other wells that we're going to instrument in the next trip in the treatment plant that are closer to the river. And we have 4 confirmed we have 2 others confirmed that are on the eastern side of the Russian River. And we are in talks to have to add another one with the well owner that he is still thinking about it. We also have 2 that we want to drill, and I think Sarah has variable agreements for them. One of them is a nested well that is going to go for the 3 aquifer systems, and we do have a stream gauge already available. A USGS gauge is right by the treatment plant. So that's what we started, and we are hoping that by the end of September, we're going to have those 4 confirmed wells instrumented, and we're going to get some data that we can use for the GSP. For the central transect, there was a problem that the public lands that we wanted to drill in on the eastern side of the river were not available. There are no CAD wells in that area either. So that's what we are following up to see the possibilities to find an existing well. As soon as we get a candidate that we can instrument or we can drill, we do have 3 existing monitoring wells in the western side of the river that we're going to talk to the owners to be able to instrument. There we also have a USGS stream gauge that we can use. It's already available. And the last one in the northern part of the basin, the Redwood Valley area, we have 5 existing monitoring wells. 3 of them are not in the CASGEM program. So one is actually owned by a school district that we wanted to drill, but they do have an existing well that we're going to try to instrument. And 2 are from regional board monitoring program that's in the GeoTracker that Sarah has a verbal agreement from them that we can instrument it. There are 2 CASGEM wells pending that we're going to talk to the well owners after we actually have a solid agreement with those 3 wells. And we may drill one if the school district public land is appropriate for it. The only difference for this transect is that there is no stream gauge there. When we designed it, we thought there is a NIMS gauge, National Marine and Fisheries Service, but it's not there. But as I'm gonna go through it, we are in the process of installing a stream gauge in that area. So this is what we're starting. So we already instrumented 1 in the wastewater treatment plant. So this is a dashboard. It's password protected. The people that would have access to it would be the GSA, the consultants that are working for the plan, and the well owners. And each well owner would have access to his or her own well. They can't really see the other people's data. So when they log into this dashboard, they can see like in the bottom of the page, you can see this is the continuous measurement of the groundwater elevations. And in the top, you can see other factors like climate factors that they can actually correlate. And this may be helpful to the agricultural entity or any other well owners that want to see how the groundwater elevation changes.
Mir,
Yes.
we have a question from Director Robinson.
Sure.
Amir, I was under the understanding that there were a lot of flaws with the location and the setup of that previous National Marine Fisheries Gauge site. Have you looked at it firsthand or had someone you trust check it out? And second half of the question, are we reusing any pieces of their data set or not?
So we are not using any of the data from the NIMS. To be honest, we don't have the data from the NIMS gauges. So that's the second half of your question. For the first half, We had a site visit by Jeff. He went for the monitoring wells, but he also looked at the possible locations that I'm going to show in the next slide. And we are in talks with the CLSI for the installing the instruments, and but for the start of the program, they're going to scout locations that would be suitable for this. We haven't yet honed in on one location. We know the area that we want to install, but not yet 100% determine the location. So as Director Robinson asked, so this is the second part of the update for the monitoring well. So we have in the Prop 68 application, we allocated budget for installing stream gauges and repairing existing stream gauges. So we started discussions to start with 2 new stream gauge in the basin. One is in the same location in the Redwood Valley. This would be helpful first because of our transit that we don't have any stream gauge. And second, because if we can get to the northern part of the basin, it would be representative of the flow coming into the basin, and it would really help our budgeting, like the analysis of the water budget. The second one, we are starting to instrument stream gauges into tributaries, and our priority, our first choice was the Forsyth Creek, because it also can be combined with the stream gauge on the Russian River Redwood Valley and give us a good picture. We will start with that, and if we see that the data is helpful, we're going to move to the other locations that we get input from you and the TAG, and we start installing stream gauges there too. And these are
Any
the 2
further statements or questions, Director Robinson?
Thank you. I'm good.
Okay, thanks. Okay, go forward.
Thank you. So that's practically the update for the TSS and the stream gauge locations. 2 things that we want to discuss with you, if you have any opinion about them, is that do you see any other critical areas that you want to see a well measurement or a stream gauge to be installed? These information would be really helpful to us if we know it. And it doesn't have to be in the transit system. If you see another groundwater well, that like an area that is a data gap and we should actually look for monitoring wells, please let us know. And also in the long term, we have to discuss practically not necessarily now, but as Laura mentioned in the next meeting, we're going to discuss in length about the monitoring network. We have to decide which one of these wells that we're going to instrument, or they're already in the calcium program. We want to include in the GSP monitoring program that's going to be monitored for the next 20 years. I think I stop here, Sarah, for questions or comments.
Okay, and thank you. I just would like to ask the TACMET, so what was their comments about other critical areas?
We didn't actually receive any comments about groundwater wells, but we did receive a comment from TAC Chair from Glenn that 3 other tributaries that he mentioned, like Howell Creek, Mill Creek, and I think it was Morrison Creek. So these 3 creeks he mentioned that might be good locations to install stream gauges. And we're going to look into those as for the next round of the stream gauge installation. One thing to kind of look at is we are receiving some data from CLSI that they do have some gauges in some of these tributaries. So we have to look into those 2, either to combine gauges to get more information or avoid duplication of efforts. If there is a gauge and we don't receive any additional information from installing a new one, we want to avoid that.
Okay. Vice Chair Crane, any statement, question?
No.
Director White?
No.
Director Brown? You're on mute.
Sorry. No, not at this time.
Thank you. Director Robinson?
No questions.
Okay. I'd like to go to public comment. Staff, do we have anyone that would like to speak?
I see no hands raised. If you're on your computer, you can unmute, or if you're on the phone, *6.
Sarah, this is Devin, Farm Bureau. Amir, just a quick question in terms of, listening to the TAC yesterday and, kind of reviewing this again today, in terms of what are the thoughts to really look at the surface to groundwater interaction component? Because, some of the tributaries that Mr. McGordy was referencing, I think that was sort of the intent, was to look at sort of where those surface waters and when would go underground to contribute towards possibly, following the river operations and the groundwater contribution. Is that the intent?
Thank you, Amir Mani. I'm answering the question. So just to clarify, so the intent of this transects, do you mean, Devin?
Or the additional monitoring, I guess, is really my question. It was sort of like, it really kind of depends upon what this is just the groundwater wells, I believe, versus what Glenn was speaking to. But that was sort of my thought, knowing that you had a couple areas yesterday that you're looking for some potential additional wells. So I think that's this component versus what Glenn was discussing with the surface water, correct?
Yeah, so Laura, you can add to what I'm saying. But just to give you a background, like the kind of initial answer. So we are looking to get that information from this particular monitoring design and also the general monitoring network, because we have to put in the GSP. And it's specific to the problem that the water, these tributaries go underground, and then some of them come up near the confluence with the Russian River. So if you install a stream gauge, that doesn't really help us, but it does help us to see when they go dry. And then we have a combination of a model that can estimate, and we have this network that we can actually look at the actual data. So it's a combination in some of these situations. And also, I don't think we can install stream gauges upstream and downstream of all the tributaries to kind of track the flows between locations, like as a budget. But we're going to try to just pinpoint like some of the important locations that we think we have to monitor that are representative in the basin to see that. But in terms of like measuring the amount of flow that goes underground, I don't think these stream gauges or the wells would be helpful, but watching the coordination would help us understand that interaction.
Yeah, maybe just what I would add, Devon, is that we still need to be judicious with where we install, because it's not that we can install 10 different instruments, these 10 different gauges. So I think the idea of understanding when these tributaries eventually go dry, one way to answer that question is what we presented yesterday with the idea of the satellite images, and that might be a very cheap and efficient way to look at that. So obviously it doesn't tell us exactly how much flow is underground, but if it tells us that a part of the creek is going dry and when it's going dry, that is very interesting and useful. So that's the main. I think we need to kind of combine a lot of different type of information to really get to answer all the questions that we need to answer in the GSP. So what we need to answer is when and where tribes or creeks or part of the stream go dry, and if it's if the connection between the river and the aquifer is as a losing river or a gaining river. And at this point, for this phase of the GSP, I see this as more a qualitative understanding of how the system works. And the reason why I say qualitative is because we should use this GSP to really clearly explain what are the data gaps. So what do we need to do on top of what we are already doing to fully understand this system, which is not easy. So I got the comments yesterday. They were good comments about maybe monitoring upstream and downstream in tributaries, but we might not have that's something that we can include as I would say as a data gap and kind of include it in our implementation plan. I'm not sure it would give us critical information right now. So the location where we were looking for gauges at this point were really mostly to understand river and aquifer relationships, so losing or gaining. And then up in Redwood Valley, because knowing what enters into the valley, it's a critical piece of information. And then if we, I think this is a plan, so we don't need to have everything done in the next 15 months. So we can still include that as a next step.
So thank you. I guess that was partially my concern, was expense and cost, not just for initial installation, but maintenance. And really, is that going to give us any additional information that's going to be beneficial for the intent that we need at this point in time? Yeah. So thank you.
That's exactly true. You don't want to install things that are, if we are not really fully sure that are going to provide you guys the information you need.
I have a footnote to add to that. Laura, you talked about where and when these tributaries are going dry, but people are obviously going to ask why. And that could be a real hornet's nest, because it's really easy to point your finger at groundwater depletion.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have issues with an excising river, which could be equally or perhaps even dominantly driving this change. Or maybe it's not even a change. That's the other thing too.
Yeah. And actually, one of the discussions we had yesterday is that, again, we need to remember that this plan is not supposed to fix problems that maybe are happening since 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, if a stretch, a tribes always dry, this plan is not the one that should make it flow again, right? So we will need to decide all together with the help of the PAC and the help of the board on what's a good baseline condition we believe really represent the system. And that's what we need to try to protect. So we cannot pretend to be able to make tribes flow all year round if they didn't do it in the past 50 years. That's impossible. So, and I see your point, Zach, on it's true. It's when and where and why. So the when and where is what DWR keeps asking, because everybody failed on that. So the alternative plans that have been submitted, they completely discarded this piece of information. So we think, let's put it that way, that's the easy question. Then the why is the tricky one.
Okay, anyone else?
I had a question about this gauge at the West Fork. Where exactly is that in? Thank you. I was having a hard time seeing it on my smaller device. Where exactly is that?
Yeah, this is.
So that was Director Brown?
I'm sorry. That was Brandy Brown, tribal seat.
Thank you.
Sorry. Because I personally know for a fact that the streams have gone dry a lot earlier in the last, want to say, 3 years in Redwood Valley, specifically by Tomkai. There's a stream there that used to run all the way all year round. Used to be fish in that stream, and they used to run in that stream. And in the past, I want to say 5 years, that has gone dry. I want to say by May. So how far up are we looking in Redwood Valley specifically, where the Russian River is coming into the watershed?
This is Amir Mani from LWA. So responding to the question of Director Brown. So as I mentioned, we are not yet 100% zoomed in on one specific location, but what you see in the picture is basically, so if I just read it on the map, it starts from the East School Bay and it hits the Russian River, and it's basically north of the Forsyth Creek when it goes to the Russian River. So we chose this location because it is very advantageous to us if we can get it as close as possible to the most northern part of the basin. But then there is another point that we want to have from this gauge is that we want to couple it with that transect that we show. And that transect is not that much north. So we have to compromise between these two goals and get it somewhere that we can use it for both, for kind of measuring the flow that's coming into the basin and also coupling it with the other wells. So somewhere in this area, a bit to the north, I think we're kind of moved a bit to the north based on our discussion with the CLSI, but not that much. That is like in the start of the basin. But a bit to the north of the location that you see now on your pictures is where we are looking for now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Hearing none, we'll move on to item B. Discussion regarding the development of groundwater sustainability plan chapters and upcoming opportunities for review. So please go forward with the presentation.
Sorry, I was muted. Laura Foglia, Larry Walker Associates. And here we just want to give you an update on where we are with writing the chapters and where we can see your role coming up for reviewing what we are developing. You know, the final goal, just to remind you, is to have a public draft out for comments at some point, June, July next year. So it's really not much time. This means also that probably you will have at least 2 opportunities to review all this material. But our goal is not to give you everything all at once, but just roll out pieces while we go. So the first chapter, Amir is already working with Andrew, your new employee on board, and it's mostly administrative information. We will have that, probably we can have that done pretty quickly. What we really concentrated in the past 3 months is on the plan area and basin settings, and this is pretty much all done. It will be reviewed by Amir and Andrew next week, and it will go out to the TAC the week of September 21st. And once we get the comments from the TAC, we include the comment, and at that point, it will be available to you for review. So it's gonna happen at some point in October. And so this is kind of, I have to say, chapter 2 is the long chapter. And then we are working on chapter 3 and chapter 4 kind of in parallel while we go through sustainable management criteria. So if you remember, we already had quite a bit of discussion about water quality and subsidence. So we are wrapping up those 2 components of chapter 3 and 4. And the idea is to have it ready for the TAC in October. And again, after the TAC reviews, and it comes to you. And the plan implementation is the one that will really be rolled out at the end. At the same time, looking at the submitted GSPs, this is the short one. So it's the short chapter. So it should be fine, even if we have it ready, let's say March, April next year. So this is to give you an idea of where we are. And chapter 2, we rolled out chapter 2.1 mostly as an exercise early in, it was end of last year. And now we kind of included all the information that go into what is called chapter 2.2. Chapter 2.2 really includes all the description of the current condition of the basin. So it's also a chapter where we may need a lot of input in case we don't represent things. You live there, so you know that better than us. And it's where we are really kind of describing how the system look like. So we are, your comments and comments are really welcome. And
I just want to quickly add in too, as Andrew goes through this, he's going to be reaching out to possibly a lot of the staff of your agency. There are a few bits and pieces that we are missing, so we're going to be plugging those in. And again, your comments be greatly appreciated when we get this rolled out.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, because this is that honestly, we cannot really complete without your the information coming from you. So we just want to be clear and sure that everything is represented in a correct way. And so here you have a preliminary schedule of when everything will go to the TAC, and then depending on how quickly and how consistent are the comments from the TAC, then the chapters will get to you for revision. And I think this is pretty much it as a quick update. It's mostly to tell you that we are producing also the plan itself, not just playing with data and models.
Okay, directors, Director White, any statements or questions?
No, thank you.
Director Brown?
No, thank you.
Director Robinson?
Should I say aye again or no questions?
Statement or questions?
I understand,
Of
no
the presenters?
questions.
I heard that was an I for you're going to make comments.
I love Zoom meetings.
And I can't see any of you, so I'm in the dark. Okay, do you, Zach, have a question or a statement?
No questions, thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Vice Chair Crane?
No comment other than I was concerned he made an eye for an eye.
He may have. Okay, we'll go to public comment. Do we have anybody from the public that would like to comment on agenda item B?
I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. Then we're moving on to item C. And item C is presentation and discussion regarding the development of future scenarios and the scenario development survey. So go forward with the presentation, please.
Sure. So what we are presenting here is a survey that we already rolled out at the TAC in June. We got some preliminary idea. We figured that we wanted to involve you a little more on helping us design scenarios that might be useful for your basin. And so you see the question here, and I guess we will follow up with something like a survey monkey or something like that. You know, now that we are not in the same room, we will have to use this kind of technology and ask you for more comments. The presentation is just meant to give you an idea of what we are talking about with the TAC. And one of the questions that we have is we need to think about what's the future baseline, and Amir will go in detail and give you some ideas about climate change and future baseline in a little while when talking about the model. But to just make you understand better, there are different options on setting the future baseline. We can just say, let's take the last 50 years. Okay, DWR wants 50 years. So that's kind of a requirement. So we can decide, let's do 1968 to 2018, and that's our baseline scenarios, but not necessarily. Somebody is suggesting, and even the TAC was suggesting, why don't we take the last 10 years and we copy 5 times the last 10 years because they were critical years. So we need to think about and get to an agreement on how we want to simulate the future baseline. What's the climate that we want to get reproduced? And we can be as creative as we want. We can do the last 25 years twice. It really depends on what we think it's a representative climate period with enough dry years, wet years, or if you want to have more dry years, because that's the direction we can include that. And then one of the key questions for scenarios that keeps coming up is there will be changes to the PVP, and how do we want to include them into the model in terms of scenarios? What do we want to simulate? And we got different suggestions from the TAC, like reduce the inflows by 50%. That was an idea. But at the end, it looks like Sonoma Water is already running some simulation and will give us some input that we can use. I think it's still, there was a great idea yesterday at the TAC meeting about having a specific meeting just to discuss possibly PVP scenarios. And I think you guys know better than us what may come down the road. So I think that was a really great idea. Thanks, Devon, for suggesting that. And we were also talking about resiliency to refilling the basin and discussing possible scenarios there. You can go next, Amir. We are considering different, different options within these scenarios, because there is a time and budget constraint, so we cannot really run too many and overpromise to DWR. We also want to think about what's feasible, so running scenarios that are eventually on the long term can be implemented. We want scenarios that can benefit the plan and also the future management, and also look at the applicability and the probability of scenarios to happen. At the same time, the future scenarios will really help us a lot in the setting of the sustainable management criteria. So, and besides improving the understanding that we have about the system. And we were also thinking about, should we consider scenarios that look at changes in land use and agriculture? Is that something that may happen? Should we simulate an increase in cannabis production, for example? Should we simulate urban expansion? If yes, we need to kind of get ideas of the scale of, for example, also for the urban expansion. And if there is an increase, for example, on population and water demand, would be good to know where, when, so that we can include these numbers into our scenarios. And then if we start thinking about more management, one idea that we discussed a few times are recharge projects that actually for Ukiah, I would say it's a combination of recharge and storage. Like think about how to store the water that maybe now with the climate changing and the precipitation coming in just a short time and being very strong, you want to store that water as much as possible. So, and again, it's where and when and the scale. I think these changes in Lake Mendocino release are kind of all connected to the PVP project. And then we are already including the recycled water project in some preliminary scenarios, but we probably need to think about scaling it up. So we will be running the scenario when the entire project is up and running. We need to think about possible changes in river channel morphology, because we know that, and if you remember, we modified our model to include the information that we have on the incision, and the in-size channel is making a difference. So now our model works way better because we have the riverbed obviously is so much lower than what it was at the beginning, just looking at the topography. So we need to think about, is there something that can be done there or even that can be considered? And I think this is pretty much the summary of, just again, take it with a grain of salt. This is a first list of things that came to our mind, with the idea of mostly making you and the TAC think about it, because you live in the area, you know better than us. So this is just possible ideas. And you may say that some of these ideas are crazy. That's part of the goal, because if something is really crazy, it may create a reaction and provide us with some more feasible ideas. So I think we will take all this question. I want to give you a quick update and create a survey that we will circulate. And then probably at the next meeting, we will try to summarize a more concrete suggestion from you guys and from the TAC. So if somebody has something really burning and some great ideas that we should try, the model is almost ready to run a lot of different scenarios. So we need to be careful, because still it takes a day to run. So we don't, and you know, there is always something that goes wrong. So you may have to consider 2 days, but it's simulating properly the entire watershed right now. But this doesn't mean that some of these scenarios might be very easy to run with the model. So we can consider a combination of different ideas. And I think with this, I will go to question, comments, suggestions.
Okay, and just for those that are listening in that do not know what PVP is, that's the Potter Valley Project. Is that correct?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Spread it out.
I just wanted to make sure that that was understood. So directors, statements or questions. Director Brown.
None at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Director Robinson.
Let's go with none at this time.
You have too many, Zach, right?
Oh, he's great. I love it.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Crane.
One comment. In terms of growth in this valley, we've been something under 1% for years. California as an environment for industry and value-added jobs being what it is, I don't see that changing much anytime soon. So if there's a consideration for growth, I would think it's not very robust.
Thank you for that comment. And the census will be interesting to see what numbers come out, what 2010 is versus 2020. Okay. Director White.
Yeah, one of the objectives in these scenarios was, what I understand, is that it has to have some level of practicality and feasibility in terms of expense and that sort of thing. And I know that you know, the modeling done by Sam Sandoval a while back with raising the dam and the Potter Valley project either going away or just running in the winter and things like that, that's already been looked at. Well, we know that you know, if one raises the dam, the ability to capture some of our winter rains is increased, holding it for more of it. But do you think that it's practical to work with that at all in this plan? Because realistically, the money and the time, it could be the 50-year horizon before we ever saw that dam get raised. I just, you know, wonder if we want that in there and if it makes sense, even though it obviously is a factor that would make a big difference.
Yeah, we didn't include that again right now, because we were thinking more at scenarios that eventually we can control in a little bit shorter time frame, and also that can be controlled a little more. But these scenarios, they don't need just to be applicable and feasible. I think if we need to take advantage of this model that basically can take some of the output produced by what SEM did in the past and use it, and then and fully integrate into the groundwater system. We can look also at something which is, let's say, a little crazy, let's put it that way, or that you see that it's not going to happen in 50 years. So probably we will have to come up with a two-tiered approach of scenarios that maybe will have a smaller impact, but can be feasibly and in a reasonable time frame implemented. And with reasonable time frame, I'm thinking the GSP time frame, so 20 years basically after we submit. But we should also, we may also consider more long-term scenarios like this one, and just include it as an information, and then see, what we will have to do for these scenarios is also to include an economical study. So how much the project is gonna cost and how much is the benefit. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be there. So I can imagine that that's also another component that needs to be considered. But we would welcome also scenarios, ideas that are not necessarily feasible now. That's fine. Actually would help us frame a little bit our mind around these scenarios.
Just this is Amir Mani. Just to add to that, if Al, so one thing that might be helpful to consider is that if the probability of PVP scenario is high enough, then it might affect other scenarios that we may run. Like there were talks yesterday about it probably goes in, so some changes go in 2030 when we asked about when to actually start the PVP. So if it's 2030 and we're running a scenario about cannabis that goes up to 2050, then we have to decide if we want to have that change in that scenario, or if we're going to just run that scenario business as usual. So some of these scenarios may become a combination, exactly like if you want to do a climate change with cannabis, or we just want to use historical climate. So I know, so Sonoma Water has already done some of these modeling for PVP, and I think our indication is we want to use as much as possible what they've done as an input to our model, and just run the model for the scenario, like the inflows that they already modeled. But it's practically the tax and yours decision what scenarios to run and what would be helpful.
So the knowledge of what's going to happen, of course, is imperfect. And I guess every 5 years we have to sort of take another look at this. Is that true?
Yeah, that's exactly true. And
So,
every 5 years you can correct the direction. Let's put it that way.
okay, so we really don't have to know how things are going to go. We can say, if they go this way, it would look like this. If they go that way, it would look like that. And then 5 years later, we could say it's going this way, so we can go further looking in that direction as to what those implications are. So none of that has to be like carved in stone.
Yeah, you're totally
Okay,
right.
thank you.
That's exactly the approach.
Okay, that answers everything. Thank you.
Chair Brown?
I was muted. I was talking. Sorry about that. Now we'll go to the public for any comment. Anyone that would like to speak on item C, please state your name for the record.
And we have Devin Jones.
Yes, Devin Jones, Mendocino County Farm Bureau, and Director White, I think, addressed a few of my questions. Maybe to follow up, knowing that there is a significant amount of unknown around the Potter Valley project within the next 2 years, 5 years, short term, how much effort is necessary at this point in terms of the modeling to really include all of these potential scenarios where we will most likely need to be revisiting those on an annual basis, if not on the 5-year basis? I don't, in my mind, it kind of seems like you may have to do the work twice or 3 times, as this sort of evolves. I mean, none of us really know the answers to a lot of these things. And part of my concern as well is that, we still, as part of the SGMA process, I feel one of the main goals is to really look at the groundwater analysis and what the surface water to groundwater interactions are. We don't have those answers yet. I think there's a lot of assumptions that are being made about, what surface water contributes towards groundwater and maybe vice versa. So I would really, as much as the important water supply that comes from the Potter Valley project is critical, I don't want to see this process get sucked into the never-ending unknowns that are currently surrounding what's happening with that project. So how do we do our due diligence without sort of getting stuck in the quagmire of what's happening with the surface water situation?
I mean, in a sense, David, the system here, it's a full surface water groundwater interaction, and we know that. So unfortunately, what happened to the surface water has an impact on the groundwater. And I understand your concern about all the uncertainties. And I think our goal right now should be to kind of be able to represent the surface water groundwater interaction and how the water is used and how the water moves through the valley as it is right now. And then I really appreciate your comments about, in principle, we can run thousands of scenarios of this. It looks like everybody has a different perspective on this Potter Valley project. And to tell you the truth, what we were discussing recently is probably not even including, not even doing much ourselves in terms of simulation of the upper part of, let's say, upstream of Lake Mendocino, but try to see if we can rely a bit on all the simulation that Sonoma Water is doing and take those with a grain of salt and use some of them as input in our model. And that would be a very efficient way to simulate different scenarios with really kind of very limited effort on our side, and maybe giving you a spectrum of possible outcomes. Let's put it that way. But I think, unfortunately, with the fact that there is this strong connection between the surface water availability and the groundwater, that's something we have to deal with. I believe we should, for now, we should kind of acknowledge what we know, and in the plan, be very clear on what we need to, which data we need to collect to fully understand the system and the interaction all over the valley. And then, as Al was saying, keep this uncertainty about the future release and whatever as an open question, because we don't want to speculate, right? And as you said, we don't want to run tons of scenarios for the sake of running them. That's also why among the scenarios that we are suggesting, there is something which is a little bit more just concentrated in the valley. So things that eventually can be done in an easy way, and they don't depend necessarily on the release from the Potter Valley project. Does it?
Thank you. And just for the record, I wanted to give Beth credit from the flood control. She was the one that suggested the meeting for the Potter Valley project. So I would support that, but it was Beth's idea.
Sorry for mixing up the two of you.
So anyone else for public comment?
Yes, this is Beth from the Russian River Flood Control District. Thank you, Devin, for bringing up those issues, and Laura, thank you for addressing them. I think it's really important to look at a few of the different scenarios with the Potter Valley project flows more immediately, because this relationship between groundwater and surface water is widely debated still in the valley. And I think with the current and possibly extended drought, some of this information could be helpful as well in the immediacy. But yeah, I would definitely support doing that. And I think having this sub meeting about the Potter Valley project, we could all come to some agreement about which, how many scenarios are appropriate, and then really whittle them down. So I want to thank everybody for being willing to participate in that. Thank you.
Beth.
Okay. Any other public comment? Hearing none, we'll move forward to item D on our agenda, discussion and possible action regarding integrated model updates and preliminary surface water and groundwater interaction results. So go forward with the presentation, please.
Yeah, so a quick update. This is the kind of line of development that we presented quite a few times, and we finally got to the last point. So we have the model all together is working, and we are really just trying to finalize a calibration that seems to be acceptable. We fixed a few problems, and one of these problems was that we were not originally fully representing the incised channels, and those ended up being very critical. So we are still looking at some at implementing some of the demands and diversion into the final full coupled model. And we are really also working on including all the possible data that we have in the model, because we would like to use them in the calibration process. And we got some data recently from CLSI, so we will be able to really include all what we have into this round of calibration. We are still working on developing what it's called the agricultural package, which is, we would like to include it because it is the package that USGS developed, and they are including it in the full Russian River model that we are trying to coordinate with. I think I recently found out that our model will be released so much sooner than the USGS model, so we have to go first, and when their model will be available, there will be some discussion on integration. But having the agricultural package has a couple of other benefits beside the being able to integrate with the big Russian River model. It will make our life much easier in representing land use changes, for example, and agricultural practices changes. So I think this is the main, and also for looking at future scenarios, it will help us with that component. And next. And with this one, I'll pass it to Amir, so he will give you an idea of how we will be presenting the data in the chapter that you will get in October, November, December. And he will start introducing the concept of climate change analysis that we are taking right now from DWR, but which is kind of open for discussion. Let's put it that way.
Thank you, Laura. This is Amir Mani from LWA. So as Laura mentioned, this is a kind of an intro to what will come in the next meetings through the chapters and also in our presentations. So as Laura mentioned, the model is in the final calibration stage. So we are still tuning it, but we are in the stage that we have a couple of models. So we can actually now produce water budgets for the watershed and for the basin. And that's a critical part of the discussion and also for the chapter 2 and the whole GSP. So one thing that is required from us by the DWR regulations for Sigma is that whatever we produce from now on in terms of water budget, in terms of SMCs, in terms of anything, any type of analysis that we do, is that they go in 3 separate categories. So we have to define a dry year, we have to define a normal year, and we have to define a wet year. So we went through, based on our discussion about the future scenarios, we assumed based on previous discussion in the TAG that the 50-year future baseline period that we want to consider basically runs from 1968 to 2018. So that's kind of the historical baseline that we're going to use to reproduce the future. And we started from 1965 to have like a couple of years for the spin up of the model. So what you see in this graph is basically starting from 1965 to 2018. And we used a gamma distribution fitted to the precipitation and based on quantiles of basically just if the probability is less than 10%, it would be critical. Less than the probability of that much precipitation in the whole watershed is less than 10%, it would be a critical year. If it's less than 35%, it would be a dry year. If it's between 35 and 50%, it would be below normal. 50 to 75% would be above normal, and over 75% is a wet year. So based on that color coded, you can see that this is the arrangement of the years. I have to mention that these are all based on water years, not calendar years. So what you see here is basically runs from October to October. So based on this type of assessment, this is what we come up with. So it is worth mentioning that in the future analysis, the dry and critical would be meshed together as one category, as one dry years. So what you see as orange and red would be just dry years. Then below normal and above normal, we can consider as normal years, and wet years would be wet. So these are the 3 types of years that we're going to move forward with. What would be really helpful to us is if you could look at this and share with us your opinion. If you see, so this is based on analysis. So if you see a year that seems strange to be in the wet category or in the above normal category based on what you experienced, we can actually take a look specifically on that and change it. The importance of this analysis is that whatever we produce in the months to come is based on these years. So we average the results of these years and put it as a category of wet, as a normal, as a dry year. So according to this discussion, so we have 3 types of budget. So what you see here is basically plots from our uncalibrated model right now. Please do not pay attention to the numbers yet. It's not the calibrated, it's not the final, but this is practically showing that we can have a dry year budget on the top left corner of the slide. We can have a normal water budget that is on the right side of the slide, and in the bottom, you see the wet year, and you see basically since the y-axis is the same scale, it just keeps growing from dry to wet. So, and we already knew that this basin is practically precipitation dependent because the groundwater basin seems to refill and the stream flow goes out. So you can see the amount of precipitation, evaporation, and the amount of stream flow that goes out of the watershed just grows by the type of year, goes from dry to wet. Just one thing to mention, although this is a draft result, this is watershed wide. This is not just basin, so it's a northern Russian River watershed.
Question.
Sure.
Yes, go forward.
How far back did you look? Why select the year you selected? There's more than 100 years of water records here in terms of precipitation. What's the rationale for picking the one that was picked?
So I used a Ukiah gauge to fit the gamma distribution. I went to the beginning of the record. But what you see here is basically from 1965 to 2018 because we want to use this period. But the distribution fitting is actually independent of this, but as many as data points that you have would help the distribution that you fit. So if I remember correctly, but the beginning of the data was 1915. I have to check, but I think the beginning was 1915.
I missed the part of why.
So the reason for the 1915 is just as many years as we get to just fit the distribution of how the precipitation actually changes in the basin. So we prefer to have more data than less because it improves the accuracy of the distribution that we fit. We can actually limit it if you want to see just limited to a portion, we can do that. But the reason for why we're using 1965 to 2018, we have to do a 50-year period for future baseline. So either we have to go 50 years back, or we can repeat a 25-year period twice, or we can repeat a 10-year period 5 times. But that 50-year period is a constant that DWR requires us to do. So that for now, we are going from 1968 to 2018. That's our 50-year for the future baseline.
Is 50 years a required maximum?
It's not a
Would
maximum.
we know more about what's happened here if we reached back farther, because the data is available?
Yes. So the 50 years is a required minimum. So we can't go less than the 50 years. We can't have like 25 years in the future. You have to have at least 50 years in the future. We can go to more than that, but it is worth mentioning, first of all, for the climate change scenarios, what DWR provides is 2030 and 70 stages. So going over that, we don't have anything to represent the climate change. And also in other aspects, if you just run a scenario based on historical precipitation, as you go too far in the future, uncertainty becomes very large. So sometimes it's not worth like going like 100 years predicting results. But
I'm not talking about predicting. I think predicting is a fool's game based upon how much sun shines when and when there are fires and so many other things about where butterflies do whatever they do that makes things happen, God only knows where. But in terms of history, which should be informative of trajectories, I'm in favor of looking at a greater time span behind us to help us understand how this has cycled over the decades and decades and decades. That's the root of my question.
So to clarify.
Excuse me.
Yes.
And the speaker is Vice Chair Crane. Thank you.
My apologies.
Just to clarify, do you mean like for this type of analysis, just the water year types we should go back, or are you meaning like about the historical period that we represent in the model, for example?
I'm saying that if we're going to make decisions upon definitions of wet and dry years, in terms of how long this new process may be in place, having a greater base of information of what's happened in the past would be more helpful than this, to me, very short view in terms of what we're dealing with. So,
yeah,
Maybe
one. Yeah, sure, Laura. Go ahead.
Okay. Now, maybe just one thing to point out is that the climate is one piece of what goes into our model, but then we also have the land use and kind of all the surface water information. And if we go too far back, there is a lot of uncertainty there that we may try to resolve, but we kind of figure that this time frame, it's still not making a huge difference in making the decision at 20 years back. But it doesn't make much sense for us to run the model so far back, because we would end up making so many assumptions on other components of the model.
all right, educate me on what assumptions are involved in looking at the rainfall record for years past. What is to be assumed?
No, the rainfall would be fine. The problem is that we need to also have images of land use or information on the land use, for example, or on all the agricultural practices. And those information might not be as easy to just retrieve.
Laura, if I understood correctly, sure. Director Crane is kind of focusing on this analysis, like just this slide. And I can actually say that, so that distribution that I said, I actually went to the beginning of the gauge. So when fitting the distribution and determining these thresholds for the wet, dry, above normal, below normal, we use the whole period. It's just we're showing from 1965. So I can actually send you from the beginning of the record the types of years. So we use the whole record. Yeah, the whole
Sorry,
record.
Amir.
Yeah, I can send that figure that starts from 1915. I just showed the period that we're going to use as the baseline.
Yeah, my remark was, or my questions are based specifically to definition of wet and dry, etc. And that data, I believe, exists without much manipulation. It's simply considering it.
Yes,
Thank you.
and we did. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood.
Do we have any other questions?
No, you can move forward.
Well, no, I have a question.
Oh, okay. State your name.
So this is Alfred White, Director White. On this point that Director Crane has been bringing up, using the full spectrum, you can come up with the border, the boundaries for your dry, your wet, and then your normal. But when you want to do a baseline, what is a normal year? Especially going forward. And this is not to this chart here, but I think we have to have some kind of baseline when we start looking for 20 years down the road or 50 years down the road. It would seem to me that our baseline should be made up more of, say, the past 25 years twice, because if we look at factors that are influencing the climate and thus the wet and dry and temperature and all that stuff, those things are changing somewhat rapidly, more rapidly each year than they were in the past. And I would be concerned about taking an assumption that things are going to always be like they were. I think they're not. And so that would be my thought on that. That's all I have to say.
Yes, thanks, Al. And that's a very valid point. So that was a discussion in the tag too of what we want to use as the baseline. One thing to point out on your point about this analysis, it also, so this is when we use the whole record, that actually affects those cutoff points that we determine the wet, dry, and normal. So if you wanted to represent more the current situation, the current conditions of the climate, then probably you should limit it instead of going like to the beginning of 1950, and you can go start from 1970. And based on that distribution, actually assign these critical, dry, normal, and wet. That is basically your decision. You know the basin better, but we have to come up with a method that you and the TAC agrees on. One other thing that I would add is that I'm using a Ukiah gauge as a representative of the basin. Now, if you go and use a Potter Valley gauge, you might get different years. So that was the question that we pointed in the tag, and Ukiah seemed to be an acceptable gauge for the basin. But yes, I agree with you. For now, we are using the 50-year basin. I'm gonna present to you the climate change scenarios, and there is a caveat there that might affect your perspective about the 25-year period being twice repeated. But it is something that is totally up to the GSA to decide what they want to do about their future baseline.
This is Director Robinson. I have a question for Amir on this point. Amir, am I correct that you don't use the actual rainfall in a given year? You just take 25, 50, it could be 100 years of rainfall data, convert that to a gamma distribution, and that's what the model consumes. Is that right?
This analysis, yes.
So maybe the real question is, does the gamma distribution that you get off 25 years of data versus the 50 years of data versus the 100 years of data, are those the same gamma distribution, or do they look pretty different? And if they look pretty different, then this issue is a big deal. If they look kind of the same, there's not a whole lot going on here.
I did a 50-year and a 100-year. They were different. They were not. It depends what you define as significantly different. But yeah, they were not that different. But this is something that I can actually do and share with you to see, yes, how it differs from 25 years to 50 years and 100 years. It's a very simple analysis. I can just generate it and follow up with you on that.
Sounds great.
Okay. Anyone else? This has been an interesting discussion. Okay.
Amir Mani is still continuing the presentation. So
yeah.
I went through this slide, and yes, so basically after the GSA agrees on the future baseline that they want to set, it still has to be the minimum of 50 years. But now you can change how you determine that 50 years of historical precipitation to climate data to be represented in the future. So this slide just comes directly from the regulations of the SGMA. I just wanted to show you what we have to do, what we're required to do. So all of them come from the section 354.18, different parts of it. So the C, it says the same thing: projected hydrology shall utilize 50 years of historical precipitation, evapotranspiration, and streamflow information as the baseline condition for estimating future hydrology. So this is where that 50 years comes from. Then the section D, it says that we should utilize the following information provided by department, and combined with section E, it just points us to when you're simulating future, when you're simulating climate change or anything in the future, you have to use the best knowledge available at the cutoff of your historical basin. So basically, if you go as historical up to 2018, the start of our future process would be the conditions at 2018. So although we use for example, 1965 to 2018 climate, we started at 1965 with the conditions in 2018 because we want to go to the future. And those conditions are the ones that Laura pointed out, like the land use, all of those that actually affects the hydrology of the basin. So what is available to us? To point out, there are different methods that we can do climate change analysis and simulation. One of those methods have become available by DWR that we're presenting here. All of those different methods have different advantages and disadvantages. Our intention here is to just present to you what the proposed DWR method is and what are the disadvantages and advantages, so you know how we're moving forward and decide on that. So what is available is that DWR provided data and tools to assist the GSAs. The data is practically multipliers of precipitation and evapotranspiration, that you multiply the historical climate by those factors and you perturb the historical climate a bit to represent the climate change. Is it required to use the DWR approach? No. Each GSA can decide to go another way. It is required to represent climate change impacts, but it's not required to use what DWR proposed as the approach to do it. For future updates of the plan, it is specifically pointed out that as better data becomes available, as better methods become available, you have to update your plan in those 5 years that I had already mentioned. So in the updates that the GSP goes through, the analysis should be updated as necessary. So this is based on what DWR already provided. What you see is two figures, one on the top right, one in the bottom. The top right is conditions at 2030. The bottom is condition at 2070. These two are the scenarios that DWR provided as climate change. So you have a 2030 scenario, you have a 2070 scenario. 2030 is practically what's called short-term scenario that DWR proposes to be used for designing management actions, so to decide on management actions. 2070 is the scenario that DWR proposes as a long-term future that you can assess if the basin stays sustainable based on your management actions. So as you can see, that climate change always goes higher when you go into the future. So 2030 is a bit lower in terms of impacts than 2070. It shows the North Coast in general would receive a bit more precipitation, and evapotranspiration would go higher. 2070 would be more significant. So what I'm showing here is on the top chart, basically, these might change because how I got it is from the model by averaging the whole watershed and the whole precipitation and evapotranspiration to just one data point. So as we calibrate the model, these would be different, but the trend would be the same. So we can actually discuss the trends. So what you see here is the changes in precipitation. So the method that the DWR proposes is different than most of the normal assessments that climate change analysis is done. Normally you see an increase in the trend, whatever you look at, the temperature is increasing, the sea level is rising, everything goes up. But what DWR proposes is a period that is representative of a period of 30 years with the median of 2030 and a period of 30 years with a median of 2070. So you see these shifts. So it just shows how the climate would shift from this current status of like 30 years of 1995, for example, 2018, then you go to a 2030 period. So what it shows here is that the precipitation would slightly shift in 2030 and it would largely shift in 2070. As I said, this would be a bit different when we calibrate and correct some of the model errors, but still, we can expect more precipitation in both scenarios in the future. The same type of slide is shown here. On the top, you see the changes in evapotranspiration from the whole area. You can see 2030 and 70, blue 2030, red is 2070. Both of them show a shift in evapotranspiration. This means higher evapotranspiration within the watershed. And this one actually shows them, I think, better. Still, this is a draft result, but the trend can be something that we can look at. So the blue bars are precipitation related. The red and kind of a beige color are evapotranspiration. So the dark blue is 2070, the light blue is 2030 scenarios of climate change. And you can see we saw that we have an increase in total precipitation, but it is important where that increase is happening. So the increase is mostly happening from December to March. It's the higher precipitation. But if you look at in the middle part of this chart, it's actually most of the time decreasing. So your precipitation would decrease when you need it for agriculture. It would increase with flashy storms during the rainy season. But if you look at evapotranspiration, all the bars are going up. So all year round, you will have more evapotranspiration in the years to come. So this is the general trend. And this is what the DWR method actually provides. DWR method just shows you what the trend is, what the shift is. And you should use that type of information to decide on the management actions. What it doesn't provide you, and you might need it, but it's just a disadvantage of the method, is because we are replicating the historical period, it doesn't change the rainfall season. It doesn't show the seasonality changes in climate. It doesn't show the longer droughts that most people expect from climate change, because we are practically relying on mirroring the climate of the historical climate and just perturbing it. So you see all the increases or decreases in the budget, you see the trend, you see the shift, but those are the things that you might miss. The seasonalities, the longer droughts, the changes in when the rainfall comes, those are the things that might be missed in this analysis. And it's good to know the deficiencies and the limitations of this approach when we move to management actions and we want to use this. I think I stop here for any questions.
Anyone? Questions? Statements? So please go forward.
I think it's the next item. Right, Sarah?
I think this is included in D.
Oh, it's included in D. Okay.
Okay. So, and this can be just this just wants to be a quick demonstration of what we are doing to try to combine the information that we are getting while going out looking for stream gauges and understanding better the system and what's available in a sense for free. So like these are Google Earth images. So basically, one idea that we came up with is look at satellite images to try to start characterizing when and at least the piece on when and where things go dry, and understand better how the vegetation changes. So what we have in the title as GDE stands for groundwater dependent ecosystems, which is really mostly thinking at vegetations that are mostly fed by groundwater. So that needs to be protected, or that the GSA wants to protect on the long run. And satellite images can really help us just visually in a very quick way, can help us understanding if some components of the vegetation are shrinking, for example, from 1 year to the next year to the next year, and what it's still what we call healthy, let's put it that way. And this is an example, or for example, an image from Morrison Creek and the tributary Morrison Creek. And this was an image from April 24th. And the second one is, wow, I cannot read, just a second. Okay. Sure. And then an image from June 15, 2010. And I think you can go to the next slide, Amir. So what you can see, oops, you missed one, I think. Okay. I want to go and point out on the wet and dry. So basically what you can see is that it's the same location, it's a slightly different angle of the picture, but we can see that in April, it was still flowing, and then in June, it was dry. So our goal is really to try to figure out locations where we are able to fully designate the river as either flowing or being dry. And depending on which images product we use, we can have really short time frame. Like in some basins, we use the Sentinel-2 product that flies over every 5 days. So basically, it's able to tell you, okay, that point in the river went dry between April 15 and April 20, or something like that. And that's really, really important. What we did in Ukiah, I think, I mean, can you go to the map? Okay. We started looking at 40 observation sites, and they are located in the map. We kind of picked them in a way that was useful, but also not all the images are good enough to really do what we are doing. So 3 of the observation are on the Russian River, West Fork, 1 is on the East Fork, and 36 are on Tribes. What we want to do is to take this approach to the next level. So we're really thinking at using different type of images that can really help us fully understand what's happening. And what we need to be, what we need to understand is that, unfortunately, even in the Ukiah Valley, we deal with very different size of the streams. For example, we have very small streams, let's say less than 10 meters, and then we have the Russian River, which is kind of easier to detect. But depending on how small the stream is, we may need different type of products. Next. Together with the river, there is all this riparian ecosystem, which is the wonderful sketch in green in this picture, which is basically telling us, okay, the vegetation around the rivers is healthy or not. And depending on how green it is, we can decide and we can understand if there is enough water feeding that part of the vegetation. And you go next. But then in the late summer, we know that there are, in Ukiah, it happens a lot, mostly on the trips, so it doesn't happen on the main stem. But we know that some of the tributaries, they just go dry. And if they go dry, it means that they may still be providing groundwater flow as groundwater to the groundwater dependent ecosystems around, but they really may lead to a loss of functional habitat. And so some of these green start becoming a little bit yellowish. And this is pretty much what we can figure out with satellite images. So if we compare the image from the spring and the image from the fall, and we see different colors, we can start having at least a qualitative understanding of how things are changing throughout the basin. And our goal is really to say, to see if we can use this satellite-based approach to assess historically assessing and also for ongoing monitoring of the disconnection of streams and the impacts on groundwater dependent ecosystems. And we are developing a sort of proof of concept at Larry Walker, trying to see, it looks like it's an approach that, for example, the Nature Conservancy really likes. DWR really approves this, and we are working on scaling it up a little. Go to next. I think we're done. Sorry, I was.
Chair Brown, it looks like we have one hand up for public comment.
Okay, I was going to move on to that. So we will go to the public. Please state your name for the record.
Devin Jones, Mendocino County Farm Bureau. And this question is for Amir's section and just a couple of clarifications. One, you had mentioned that the TAC had been thinking about, instead of using 25 years twice, they had been considering using the past 10 years 5 times. Was there any additional information as to what sort of was driving that preference? So that's my first question.
This is Amir Mani from LWA. Thank you, Devin. So just to clarify, it wasn't a TAC discussion. It was a response that we got from the future scenario survey. And in the future scenario, the first question was what you would prefer as the future baseline. So we got two answers that pointed to a similar answer that Al mentioned. So one wanted 10 years, one wanted 20 or 25 years, if I remember correctly. No more information was provided. Basically, I think the background was the same that Al mentioned, that the most recent climate would be more representative as we go.
Okay, thank you. And my second question was on a few of the slides. It specifically talked about how no agricultural surface water diversion is simulated in this run of the GS flow model. So I was just wondering why agriculture was being called out specifically for surface water, and is any other surface water diversions included, like municipal, within the model?
Yeah, I have. So it's basically all the surface water diversion. So the agriculture should not have been called out. So we have 2 types of demands that we're simulating in the GS flow. So the ones that come from groundwater, and both are from the IDC, like those figures that we discussed during TAC meetings. So the groundwater part was implemented at the pumpage to the extent that we could implement it without surface water being a part of it. The surface water diversion from the tributaries and streams in these results that you see as a draft are neglected.
So basically no surface water diversion overall was included in the run. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe we can clarify that. That would be great.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else, public comment? Hearing no one. Ms. Duquette, much longer do we have?
Sarah, I think you're on mute.
We're scheduled to go till 3:30, so we have about 8 minutes.
Okay. So directors, any final statements or comments? Hearing none, I want to thank Larry Walker Associates for the presentation, and the great discussions today. Truly appreciate it. We'll move forward to item number 7 on our agenda. Directors, do we have any reports? Okay.
Chair
Hearing
Brown?
none, staff, when are we going to be meeting in October?
We don't have a board meeting scheduled in October, but we do have one in November, and we'll also evaluate to see if we'll need one in December and work on a calendar to bring forward to you guys in 2021. May result in meeting more regularly because we have a lot to get through till we get to July when we'll have a draft. So right now, your next scheduled meeting is November 12th. And we'll have an updated calendar for you guys to look at. And before we go, I just wanted to quickly just introduce Andrew Bake, who's now with our office. He's online, and you'll be seeing his face a lot more, all of our directors. So
please take us.
Everybody, pleasure to meet and work with you over the next year. I'm a Civic Spark Fellow, which is part of AmeriCorps, and I'm going to be assisting on the plan and helping out Amir and Sarah and the team. So looking forward to it.
It's great. And I just like to welcome you, but I want Sarah to take a picture of you and send it to me so I know what you look like since I can't do the webinar. All right.
I'll send her along a photo.
Just so I know you, if we pass on the street and you're wearing a mask and I'm wearing a mask. Okay, thank you, everyone. I don't think there's any other business. So Sarah will be sending out an email about potential dates for our public meetings. I hope all of you will respond very quickly. And final words here is Chair. Keep safe and be careful. It's been a wild world. Thank you, and meeting adjourned.
Carrie, we hope you send us all a picture of you too.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
I'll